63 years old, I never thought I'd be standing in the walk-in cooler of the Pinewood Banquet Hall, tucking my gray hair up under a borrowed black cap and praying my hands would stop shaking. The cap belonged to the catering company. So did the stiff white shirt and the apron that smelled like somebody else's bleach. None of it belonged to me. But that night, neither did my own life, or so I'd convince myself. And a woman who thinks she's losing everything will do things she never imagined. The party in the next room was for my husband. 41 years he'd given that hospital, the last 20 as the only family doctor most of this town had ever known. Half the people out there had been brought into the world by his hands. They were throwing him a retirement gala, $300 a plate, a slideshow, a podium, a band, and I, the woman who had ironed his white coats for 4 decades, was not on the guest list. He told me it was a staff thing. Hospital employees and board members only, he said, no spouses, some insurance liability nonsense about the venue. He said it so smoothly, buttering his toast, not even looking up, that I'd nodded and said, of course, honey, that's fine. I'd believed him. Why on earth wouldn't I? After 41 years, you stop checking a man's story the way you stop checking whether the floor is still under your feet. But 3 weeks before that night, I'd gone looking for his reading glasses and found a credit card statement folded into the bottom of his tackle box. My husband hadn't gone fishing since his knees went bad. There was a charge on it from a jeweler 2 towns over, $6,800, and under it, 4 separate charges to a contractor I'd never heard of and a hotel in a town I knew we had no reason to visit. I did not own anything worth $6,800. Our anniversary had come and gone in May with a card and a casserole. So I stood in that cooler with goosebumps rising on my arms, and I asked myself the question that had been eating me alive for 3 weeks. Who was wearing my husband's jewelry, and why was he hiding her from me in a town an hour up the highway? I'd gotten in through Ramona. She'd run catering in this county for 30 years and owed me a favor going back to when I'd watched her kids during her own divorce. When I called her crying and asked her to slip me onto the crew for one night, no questions, she went quiet for a second and then said, "Honey, you wear a size 8 shirt, right?" That was the whole conversation. That's what real friends do. They don't make you explain the worst day of your life out loud. Ramona had been firm about one thing. You stay in the back. You run the kitchen line. You carry trays to the far end. You keep that cap low. You're not there to talk to anybody. You're there to look. I promised. And I'll tell you the truth. The not being recognized part scared me less than you'd think. And here's why. My husband is the vainest man God ever made about his eyes. He's needed glasses for 10 years and refuses to wear them in public because he thinks they make him look old. Add to that the dim gold lighting they always use at these things. A cap pulled to my eyebrows. A pair of dollar store readers I didn't need perched on my nose. And the simple fact that no one on this earth looks at the face of the woman refilling the water glasses. I'd spent 40 years learning how invisible a wife can be. That night I was going to use it. I pushed out of the cooler with a tray of stuffed mushrooms and stepped into the noise. The hall glittered. White lights strung up the rafters, hydrangeas on every table. A banner that said 41 years of care in gold letters. And at the center table, there he was. My husband, silver hair combed back, the navy suit I'd picked out for our grandson's christening, laughing that big open laugh I hadn't gotten out of him in months. He looked happy. He looked 10 years younger. He looked like a man with a secret that was treating him very, very well. I started working the room, circling closer, keeping the tray up near my chin. I passed a man named Walt from the hospital board who'd sat at my own dinner table a dozen times, and he took a mushroom and said, "Thank you, dear," without seeing one thing about me. I passed his golf partner. I passed 2 nurses I'd known for years, not a flicker. I was a black cap and a pair of hands, and somewhere underneath the hurt of that, a cold little voice in me said, "Good. Stay invisible. Find out the truth." That's when I saw her. She was sitting 2 seats from my husband, young, maybe 34, with dark hair pinned up and a deep green dress that caught the light. Pretty in a quiet way, not flashy, which somehow made it worse. And the way she leaned toward him when he talked, the way she laughed a half second before everyone else like she already knew the punchline, the way her hand rested on the back of his chair. I knew that posture. I'd had it myself once, leaning toward the same man across a diner counter in 1981, when he was a broke medical student and I was the waitress who refilled his coffee for free. I had to set my tray down on a service station before I dropped it. The speeches started. The chief of staff got up and talked about my husband's house calls, the babies, the way he'd kept the clinic open through 2 recessions. People dabbed their eyes. And then he said, and I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce the young woman who's made this past year possible, who's been at Doc's side through this whole transition. And he gestured to the green dress, and she stood and gave a little wave, and the whole room applauded her. And my husband looked up at her with something on his face I can only call tenderness, and the floor tipped under me. I didn't hear the rest. I walked fast, through the swinging door into the kitchen, past Ramona, who caught one look at my face and didn't say a word, out the loading door into the back lot where the dumpsters were. The October air hit me like a bucket of cold water, and I leaned against the brick and tried to remember how to breathe. 41 years. I put that man through his residency working double shifts at the phone company. I raised our 2 kids practically by myself while he was on call, taught them to ride bikes, sat through every recital alone in a folding chair, told them Daddy was saving lives so they wouldn't feel the empty seat beside me. I smiled at 40 years of hospital Christmas parties. I gave him my whole life, one ordinary day at a time, and I never once asked for a single night to be about me. And now I was standing by a dumpster in a borrowed apron while he toasted a girl half my age inside. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. My daughter, Caroline. "Mom, you doing okay? Dad said you weren't feeling well and stayed home. Want me to bring soup tomorrow?" I stared at it for a long time. He'd told our daughter I was sick. He'd lied to our own child to keep me away. I typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired. Love you." Another lie. We were a family of liars now, all of us, and the sickest part was how easy mine came out. I straightened my cap. I wasn't finished. If my marriage was ending, I was going to walk into it with my eyes open. I was going to know exactly who she was. I wiped my face and went back inside. The party had loosened up by then, people standing in clusters with drinks, the band playing something soft. I picked up a fresh tray, little lemon tarts, and I aimed myself straight at the green dress. She was standing near the dessert table, a little apart from the crowd, checking her phone with a tired expression that didn't match the room. Up close, she looked younger and somehow sadder. I held out the tray. "Lemon tart?" She looked up, and here's what stopped me cold, the same thing that's haunted me since. She actually looked at me, right at my face, met my eyes, smiled. The only person in that whole hall who saw a human being holding the tray instead of a service. "Oh, thank you," she said, taking one. "I've been eyeing these all night." She had a soft accent, somewhere southern. "You all have done a beautiful job tonight." "Thank you," I managed. My voice came out lower than my own. "Big night for the doctor." Her face went warm. "It really is. He's earned every bit of it." She glanced over at him, across the room, and there it was again, that tenderness. "I'm going to miss working with him so much. He's been—" She stopped herself, laughed a little. "Sorry, it's been an emotional year." "You too close?" I asked. I kept my eyes on the tray, on the tarts, anywhere but her face. My heart was hammering. "He saved my life," she said simply. "I mean that pretty literally." I looked it before I could stop myself. She caught my expression and smiled, but her eyes had gone glassy. "Long story. I moved up here about a year ago after a bad divorce. No family close by, no job. My little boy and me living out of a motel for a while. I was at the bottom of everything. She turned the tart over in her fingers without eating it. Your doctor in there found out? I still don't totally know how. And he didn't make a big thing of it. He just started showing up. Got me set up. Helped me find work. Helped me with my boy. Never asked for a thing back. Never once made me feel like a charity case. She shook her head. He reminds me so much of my grandfather. He passed when I was little. I've spent my whole life looking for a man like that and not finding one, and then here of all places. She laughed and wiped under her eye. Listen to me, crying on the catering staff. I'm sorry. I didn't trust myself to speak. You know what gets me? She went on, softer now, almost to herself. The way he talks about his wife, 41 years. He brings her up constantly. Half our meetings I'd be trying to keep us on track, and he'd go, well, my wife always says, or you know what my wife would do here. Harriet this, Harriet that. She smiled at the floor. I've never in my life heard a man talk about a woman the way that man talks about his wife. Like she hung the moon. I used to think people made that up for movies. She finally took a bite of the tart. She's a lucky woman. I hope she knows it. My own name in this stranger's mouth and that voice full of nothing but kindness undid something in me. I almost dropped the tray. Harriet this, Harriet that. The man I'd come here to catch was, by every account but my own suspicion, walking around this party bragging about me to anyone who'd stand still. I'm sure she does, I said, and my throat closed on it. I better get back, she said. He'll want me up front for the slideshow. It was so nice talking to you. Thank you for listening to a stranger ramble. And she touched my arm, the way you touch someone you've decided to like. And she walked away in her green dress, and I stood there holding a tray of lemon tarts. I no longer believed in. None of it fit. If she was telling the truth, and I'd worked enough years around enough people to know the sound of a lie, then she was no mistress. She was a woman he'd quietly rescued and never told me about, because that's exactly the kind of thing my husband does and never mentions. He's given away more free medicine over the years than the pharmacy ever sold. So if the green dress wasn't the answer, then who was the jewelry for? Where was the money going? What was the hotel an hour up the highway? Because something was still hidden. The lies about tonight were real. The secret charges were real. The whole reason I was standing in his apron was real. I needed to talk to him, not as his wife, not yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation in a room full of people. As the invisible woman who'd already gotten more honesty out of strangers tonight than I'd gotten out of him in months. I got my chance at the coat check near the end of the night. The crowd had thinned, the band was packing up, and he came out alone to get his overcoat, the camel-colored one I'd given him 3 Christmases back. The girl at the coat counter had stepped away, so I slid behind it. Let me get that for you, sir, I said, keeping my chin down, my voice in that lower register. Ticket number? 42, he said, and handed me the little tag, and I felt his fingers brush mine and had to turn away to find the coat so he wouldn't see my eyes. I knew that coat by heart. I'd let out the cuffs myself last winter. I held it up for him to slide into. He had no idea. His own wife of 41 years, 6 inches away, helping him into a coat I bought him, and the man could not see me. And I'll be honest with you, in that moment I wasn't even angry. I was just sad in a way that went all the way down to the floor. Quite a night, I said, smoothing the shoulders. 41 years. They sure do love you in there. He let out a long breath. They're kind, he said, more than I deserve, honestly. Oh, I doubt that. I came around the counter to hand him his hat. He took it, but he didn't move to leave. He just stood there a second, turning the hat in his hands, looking older than he had under the lights. Can I tell you something strange? He said. I've got a whole room full of people who think I'm some kind of hero tonight, and the one person I'd give all of it to trade places with, the one who actually earned every bit of this, she's not even here. My heart stopped. Your wife, I said. My wife. He smiled, but it cracked at the edge. I made a mess of tonight. I did it for what I thought were good reasons, but I made a mess. He shook his head. 41 years that woman has waited on me, sat in empty chairs, raised our kids while I was off being the hero everybody in that room is clapping for, and I've spent the last few months being so cagey and strange with her that I think—" His voice caught. "I think I've scared her. I've been so busy trying to get one thing right that I've let her think God knows what." "Then tell her," I said before I could stop myself. "Whatever it is, she'd rather have the truth than the worry." He looked at me then, really looked, and for one terrible second I was sure the cap and the glasses had failed me, sure he was about to say my name. But he just nodded slowly, like I was some wise old waitress who'd seen it all. "You're right," he said. "You're exactly right. 2 more days. I just need 2 more days, and then I'll never keep another thing from her as long as I live." He pressed a folded 20 into my hand. "Thank you for listening to an old man," he said. "You take care of yourself." And he walked out into the parking lot, and I stood behind that counter holding his $20 bill, crying into the collar of a borrowed shirt, more confused and more in love and more frightened than I'd been in my entire life. 2 more days, he'd said. Whatever it was, it had a deadline, and I had 2 days to decide whether to keep playing detective or finally be brave enough to just ask my own husband what was happening to us. I didn't sleep that night. He came home an hour after me, found me pretending to read in bed, kissed my forehead, and said the party was nice but he'd missed me, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. The next morning he was gone before I woke up. A note on the counter. "Errands. Home by supper. Love you more than coffee." It was the kind of dumb thing he'd written me for 40 years, and it made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I couldn't take another night of guessing, so I went looking, properly this time. I went through his desk, his coat pockets, the glove box of his truck, and under the spare tire in the trunk, wrapped in a shop towel, I found a thick folder. I sat down right there on the cold garage floor and opened it. Inside were photographs, old ones faded and new ones printed fresh. And it took me a moment, kneeling on that concrete, to understand what I was looking at, and then it knocked the wind clean out of me. It was my mother's house. The clapboard farmhouse on Cedar Lake where I grew up, the wide porch where my daddy used to read the paper, the crooked maple I'd fallen out of and broken my arm in the 3rd grade. We'd lost that house when my mother died, 18 years ago. We couldn't afford to keep it, couldn't afford the taxes and the repairs, and we'd sold it to strangers, and I'd cried for a month, and we never spoke of it again because some grief you just carry quietly. I had told my husband exactly one time, on the night we signed the papers, that letting that house go was the only real regret of my life. The folder was full of it, a purchase agreement dated 4 months ago with his signature, receipts from the contractor, the same one from the credit card statement, for a new porch, a new roof, the maple tree's dead limbs trimmed back to save it, a hotel an hour up the highway, the town nearest the lake, where he'd been staying overnight to oversee the work without me knowing, and photographs, dozens of them, the house coming back to life room by room, fresh white paint, the porch rebuilt board by board, my mother's kitchen restored down to the same yellow it had been when I was a girl. There was a sticky note on the inside cover in his terrible doctor's handwriting, closing Friday. "Tell her Saturday. Don't you dare cry, you old fool. You'll ruin the surprise." And tucked in the very back, a small velvet box. I opened it with shaking hands. A locket, gold, old-fashioned, the kind my mother used to wear. The $6,800 jeweler. He'd had it engraved on the back. Home. Finally. Your husband, for the next 41. I don't know how long I knelt on that garage floor and sobbed. Long enough that my knees ached when I finally stood up. He hadn't been giving our money to a younger woman. He'd been quietly, secretly, clumsily spending his entire retirement on buying me back the one thing I'd lost and never stopped missing. The green dress wasn't a mistress. The young woman he'd rescued from a motel had probably been the one helping him pick out paint colors. The hotel was a job site. The lies about the party were because the closing kept getting pushed and he was terrified I'd figure it out 2 days before he could do it right. I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. And then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for my husband to come home, and I thought about how close I'd come, how I'd stood in a banquet hall in a borrowed apron, ready to burn my whole marriage down over a story I'd written in my own head out of fear. He came in at 6 with his arms full of grocery bags, saw me sitting there, and his whole face went careful. "Hey," he said slowly, "you're up. You feeling better?" "I was at your party," I said. The bag slipped out of his hands onto the counter. "What?" "Saturday night. I was on the catering crew. I served you a mushroom and you didn't know me. I took your coat and you didn't know me." My voice was steady, which surprised me. "You told me it was employees only, but Walt's wife was there. 2 nurses' husbands were there. You lied to me, and I'd found that credit card statement, and the jewelry, and the hotel, and I thought," now my voice broke, "I thought you were leaving me. I thought you'd found somebody young, and I went there to catch you." He came around the table fast and got down on his bad knees in front of my chair, took both my hands. His eyes were wet. "Oh, honey," he said. "Oh, no, 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 no." "I know," I said. "I found the folder. I found the house." He went still, and then this man, this 65-year-old doctor who'd held himself together through 40 years of other people's worst days, put his face down on my hands and cried. "I wanted to surprise you," he said into my fingers. "I've been planning it since spring. The day it came up for sale, I called the realtor before I'd even finished my coffee. I wanted to walk you up that porch on Saturday morning and watch your face. I wanted one thing, just one, after all these years, to be for you. Not the kids, not the hospital, not anybody else. You." He lifted his head. "I kept you from the party because the closing kept getting delayed. And I couldn't have you in that room hearing people talk about the lake, asking questions, figuring it out before I could give it to you right. That girl you must have seen, that's Josie. She lost everything last year, and I helped her get back on her feet. And she's been driving up to the lake with me on weekends, helping me choose everything because she's got an eye for it. And because—" He laughed, wet and helpless. "Because I had to tell somebody, and I couldn't tell you." "You idiot," I said, and I was laughing and crying both. "You absolute idiot. You let me think for 3 weeks." "I know." I stood by a dumpster in an apron and cried. I know. He pressed his forehead to mine. "I am the dumbest smart man in this whole county. I should have just told you. I should have known you'd see the receipts. I should have known you'd never just sit home sick while your husband had a party." He pulled back and looked at me, and 41 years were in his face. "But I swear to you on everything, there has never been anybody but you. Not for 1 second. Not in 41 years. You are the only woman I have ever loved or ever will. I just wanted to bring you home." I took the locket out of my apron pocket, because of course I kept it, and I put it in his hand and turned around so he could fasten it at my neck, the way he used to fasten my necklaces when we were young and going out dancing. His fingers fumbled with the clasp the way they always had, and when it was on, I turned back and we just held onto each other at that kitchen table while the groceries melted on the counter. 2 old people who'd nearly lost everything to nothing at all. "You could have just said it," I whispered into his shoulder. "All those months. You could have just told me you love me." "I'm not always good at saying it," he said, "but I am pretty good at meaning it." We drove up to Cedar Lake that Saturday after all, the way he planned, and he made me close my eyes and walk up the steps with my hand in his. And when I opened them on that porch, the same porch, rebuilt and painted white and waiting, with the maple tree gone gold for October behind it, I cried so hard I couldn't stand, and he held me up the way he's held me up for 41 years. Here is what I've come to understand, sitting in my mother's kitchen now, the yellow walls warm in the morning light, a fresh pot of coffee going while my husband burns the toast in the next room and curses at the toaster like it personally betrayed him. The house didn't matter. Not really. As much as I'd grieved it, as much as I'd wanted it back, I would have traded that whole farmhouse for one honest conversation across our own kitchen table. The locket is beautiful, but a $20 bill pressed into my hand by a man who didn't even know it was me would have been just as precious, because the love underneath it was the same. I nearly threw 41 years away over a story I made up out of fear. I'd built a villain out of my own husband, brick by brick, because 3 weeks of secrets felt like proof, and I'd forgotten the simplest truth I know about that man, which is that he has never once, not in 4 decades, stopped trying to take care of me, even when he does it backward and sideways and so clumsily it almost breaks us. I think that's what a long marriage really is. Not the grand gestures, the Lord knows mine made a grand one. It's 2 stubborn, frightened, imperfect people who keep choosing each other anyway, who keep showing up to the same kitchen every morning, who keep meaning it even when they're bad at saying it. The toast is gray again. He calls from the other room, wounded and astonished, like it's the first time. I'm coming, I call back, and I get up, and I go help him. Because after 41 years, that is the whole of it. That is the entire secret nobody tells you. You just keep getting up. You keep walking into the next room. You keep choosing the man burning the toast again and again, every single ordinary morning, for as long as you're both lucky enough to get. We ate the burnt toast anyway, out on the porch, watching the light come up off the water, his hand on top of mine on the railing, the locket warm against my chest. The toast was terrible. It was the best breakfast of my life. I almost lost 41 years to a story I wrote inside my own head. That's the part that still keeps me up some nights, lying next to my husband in my mother's old bedroom with the lake wind coming through the window. 3 weeks of secrets and a single jewelry receipt, and I built that man into a stranger. I want to be honest about how that happened, because I think it happens to more of us than will admit it. Fear is a fast worker. The moment I found that credit card statement, my mind started filling in the blanks, and it filled them in with the ugliest answer it could find. I didn't go looking for the kindest explanation. I went looking for proof of the cruelest one. And when you go hunting for betrayal, you'll find 1,000 little things that look like it. The late nights, the locked phone, the quiet. Every one of them fit my story, because I decided the ending before I gathered a single fact. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the small, stubborn habit of looking before leaping. I put on that apron instead of throwing his suitcase on the lawn. I asked Josie a real question instead of screaming at her across a banquet hall. I read the whole folder instead of the one receipt. Every time I chose to find out before I reacted, I bought my marriage one more day. That's the thing nobody tells you about being smart in a crisis. It isn't about being clever. It's about being slow enough to let the truth catch up to your fear. And it took something to stay in that room. It would have been easier to drive home and nurse the wound. Standing by that dumpster, then walking back inside in a borrowed shirt to learn more, that took a kind of backbone I didn't know I still had at 63. The years that wear you down can also leave you tougher than you realize if you let them. But the deepest thing I carried out of that garage, kneeling on the concrete over photographs of my childhood home, was simpler. My husband had spent months loving me in the only clumsy, secretive, backward way he knew, and I'd spent those same months assuming the worst of a good man. The kindest thing I can do for the people I love is to give them the benefit of the doubt I'd want for myself. To assume the better story until the worse one is proven. People aren't owed my suspicion. They're owed my patience. I think about Josie alone in a motel with her little boy and a man who showed up without being asked. I think about Ramona, who slipped me onto that crew without making me explain my heartbreak out loud. The good in my life didn't come from people protecting themselves. It came from people choosing to be decent when it cost them something. So now I get up every morning and I help him with the toast, and I try to remember that love is mostly just showing up again and again and choosing to believe the best in the person across the table.